Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem to get on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, beginning with Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara had stated, based on the Mishnah, that if you have a mavui wider than 10 amos, then you can rectify it by using a tzuras haPesach. The Gemara had brought the shita of Rav that argues and that says that a tzuras haPesach does not misakein the width that is more than eser amos. The Gemara then wanted to say that Rabbi Yochanan ascribes to this shita of Rav, and by the way, Rav has the status of a Tana Upalig, so therefore he can argue on the Mishnah, and the Gemara wants to say that Rabbi Yochanan ascribes to this opinion as well. Then the Gemara tries to prove that this is so with the following case. When a person has 4 poles that are put into the corners of a field, the field is a vineyard where it's growing vines of grapes, and there's an issue of kilayim. So what he does is he takes the vines and he stretches them over to then make a tzuras haPesach, whereby he can go ahead and plant other vegetation on the other side of the tzuras haPesach without there being a prime of kilayim. The Gemara want to say that Rabbi Yochanan, who says that this is going to be valid for kilayim purposes, but it will not be valid for the purpose of caring for Shabbos within such a tzuras haPesach if it's wider than eser amos. The Gemara rejected this proof and said, no, here we're talking about where indeed it's not that it's greater than eser amos, but the reason why Rabbi Yochanan says it's not valid for the purposes of Shabbos is because the tzuras haPesach is made al atzad instead of al gabein, over the poles. Rather, the top is on the side going over the 2 poles. Thereby, a tzuras haPesach min hatzad, Rabbi Yochanan says, is invalid. Therefore, he's making, when it comes to kilayim, that it's valid enough for the purpose of kilayim, but in regards to tiltul on Shabbos, it is not going to be valid. The Gemara now says, Vrami de Rabbi Yochanan ad Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara wants to throw a contradiction between 2 statements of Rabbi Yochanan. Vrami de Reish Lakish ad Reish Lakish, and similarly wants to then show that there's a contradiction between 2 statements of Rabbi Yochanan. The Omer Reish Lakish mishum Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Chanina. Reish Lakish said in the name of Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina, on top of Yud Aleph Amud Beis, Peya muteres le'inin kilayim, avoloi l'Shabbos. Here it's referring to Peya is the braided vines that he says that were made over here as a tzuras haPesach. They're mutter in being mater kilayim, but they're not mutter for purposes of tiltul and Shabbos. So here we have a contradiction within Reish Lakish, because Reish Lakish had told us that it makes it valid both for kilayim as well as for Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan Omar b'mechitzos l'Shabbos deloi kach mechitzos d'liklayim deloi. Rabbi Yochanan says the same way that it's not going to be valid for the mechitzos of Shabbos, such a tzuras haPesach, so too will not be valid for kilayim as well. So here we have a contradiction of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan taught us before that for kilayim it is valid, and for Shabbos it is not valid. So again, we're left with 2 contradictions. The contradiction of Reish Lakish, who said before that such a tzuras haPesach would work not only to make valid the kilayim, but even to make valid Shabbos. And here he states that it's only going to be valid for kilayim, but not for Shabbos. Rabbi Yochanan taught before that it's only going to be valid for kilayim, not for Shabbos, and over here he says not going to be valid even for kilayim. Explains the Gemara, Bishlama de Reish Lakish, Reish Lakish lo kashya. We can answer up the 2 statements of Reish Lakish by saying Hadidei, Hadirabei. The original statement was Reish Lakish himself, who stated that such a tzuras haPesach will make valid both kilayim and also Shabbos. Whereas over here he's saying the name of his Rebbe that says only valid for Kilayim but not for Shabbos. Elo the Rabbi Yochanan kasha. But to reconcile the two statements of Rabbi Yochanan is a difficulty. If you want to say that what Rabbi Yochanan said before, what we tried to then prove, that Rabbi Yochanan said before that it's talking about that the distance of the width is more than Eser Amos, and we're talking about where the Tzuras HaPesach is Al Gabon, it's over the side posts. Then over there, he had stated, we can say that he states that it's valid for Kilayim, but is not valid for Shabbos, because after all, he ascribes the opinion of Rav that Tzuras HaPesach does not matir the width that is greater than Yud Amos. Then that would be shapir to say it that way, because then over here, the reason why he says it's not good, not even for Kilayim, is because we're talking about where it's a Tzuras HaPesach min hatzad. It doesn't go over the poles. Eliyamris idi v'idi min hatzad. But if you want to say, like we tried to conclude, that it's talking about a Tzuras HaPesach min hatzad, then it's difficult, because before he had stated that it's good for Kilayim and not for Shabbos, and here it states it's not good, not even for Kilayim. Answers the Gemara, La'olam idi v'idi min hatzad. They're both talking about a Tzuras HaPesach min hatzad. If it's Tzuras HaPesach min hatzad, so then why over here is it not going to be valid for even Kilayim? Hasom be'eser, hacha b'yoser be'eser. Because that which he said is valid for Kilayim and not for Shabbos is talking about where it's Eser Amos wide. But over here, which he says is not even valid for Kilayim, is talking about when it's beyond Eser Amos. Ask the Gemara, Minat Temro Deshani Lon Bein Eser Liyoser Me'eser. From where do we know to make such a distinction between more than Eser Amos and Eser Amos in regards to Kilayim? Do Omar le Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish Lo kach haya ma'aseh sheholach Rabbi Yehoshua etz Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri lilmod Torah af al pi shebaki behilchos Kilayim. He says that there's a ma'aseh that took place, Rabbi Yehoshua, that went to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri to learn Torah, even though that Rabbi Yehoshua was indeed a baki in the halachas of Kilayim. Umatzu sheyoshei ben hailonos, and he saw that Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri was sitting between the trees, umosach zemura me'ilon le'ilon, and he was stretching the vines of the grapes between the trees. In other words, he was forming a tzuras haPesach. Ve'omar lo, and he asked him, Rebbe, I gefonim kan, if the vines are here within the tzuras haPesach, ma'o lizro kan, can you go ahead and seed other plants, other vegetation or tvua on the other side of the Tzuras HaPesach? Omar loi be'eser muter be'yoser me'eser oser. If it's 10 amos, then it is muter for Kilayim purposes. But if it's beyond Eser amos, then not. B'mayaskinon, what are we talking about? Ilema al gabon. If we're talking about that it's a Tzuras HaPesach that is al gabon, that is directly over the poles, then Yoser me'eser oser is more than Eser amos going to be prohibited. V'hatanya, it states in the Brisa, Ho yushom kanim hadok ronin v'oso lehem peya milamala. If you had two poles that were stuck into the ground with the braided vines above, making it Tzuras HaPesach, then afilu b'yoser me'eser muter, even if it's beyond 10 amos of width, it will still make the Kilayim valid. It won't be an issue of Kilayim. It'll be valid to plant on the other side. Elalav min hatzad. Is it not therefore we're talking about that the Tzuras HaPesach is min hatzad? The kamarlei be'eser muter yoser be'eser oser. That 10 amos wide would still be valid, but beyond 10 amos, the Tzuras HaPesach would not be valid. Shma mino. Says the Gemara Vaiter Gufa, bringing back the statement that we saw before. Omar Rav Chizda Tzuras HaPesach she'oso min hatzad lo yosef lo klum. If you have a Tzuras HaPesach that's min hatzad, the hainu is not al gabon, then it's invalid. That was what Rav Chizda taught us. V'omar Rav Chizda. Now that was a way of introducing another statement of Rav Chizda. V'omar Rav Chizda. Tzuras ha-Pesach. She'omru tzricha shetei b'riya kedei lahamid ba delis. A tzuras ha-Pesach requires to be strong enough that is able to then support a doorway. Va'afilu delis shel kashim, even a minimum doorway of a kashim. Take a look at Rashi in Dibra Maschil. Kedei lahamid ba delis. What does it mean to stand a door in such a tzuras ha-Pesach? Kana, says Rashi, kol shehu, even a little bit. Va'afilu yachol lahamid ba delis shel kashim. Daya. Kashin shel shibolin. Rashi tells us a minimum amount to stand up a door, even of kashim, that's sufficient. Omrei shlokish mishum Rabbi Yonai tzuras ha-Pesach tzricha heker tzir. A tzuras ha-Pesach requires a heker tzir. Ask the Gemara, my heker tzir, what is this requirement of a heker tzir? What does this mean? Rav Avyo avkosa. Rav Avyo says avkosa. Take a look at the next Rashi. Avkosa is a chur shetzir hadelis sovev boy. It's the hole to which the door turns in. They put a hole as a hinge, and then they would open and close the door, one on the top and one on the bottom. It's true, you don't really need a delis, just in potentiality. Mihu chazia ledelis bainan. That it should be potentially fitting to have such a delis. Says the Gemara, Vayter Rav Ashkechei de Rav Acha Berei Rav Avio the Talmid de Rav Ashi. It says that Rav Acha, the son of Rav Avio, who just taught this halacha that has to be an avkosa, he found the Talmidim of Ashi. Omar Luhu, he said to the Talmidim, Omar Mar Midi Betzuras HaPesach, did Rav Ashi teach halachas in regards to Tzuras HaPesach? Omrulei, the Talmidim said to him, Loi Omar V'loi Klum. He didn't say any halachos. Says the Gemara Vayter, Tano, it's taught in the following, Braisa Tzuras HaPesach Sha'omru, Kana Mikan V'Kana Mikan, V'Kana Al Gabehem. It requires a kana mikan and kana mikan, two side posts, and a kana al gabehen, right, across the cross beams, in order to be a valid tzuras ha-Pesach. Tzrichin liga or ein tzricha liga? The question is, does that across the kana al gabehem, does it have to touch the crossbars? Or not? It has to be over them, it has to be al gabon, but does it have to then have the crossbars go all the way up and top to then touch that which is going across, or not? Answers the Gemara we have in a machloikis. Rav Nachman Omar ein tzrichin liga, Rav Sheshes Omar tzrichin liga. Rav Nachman's opinion, it does not need to touch, whereas Rav Sheshes says it does need to touch. Also, Rav Nachman went, Ve'ovad uvda beirish galusa kishmaitzei. He went and he was then affixing a tzuras ha-Pesach in the house of the Reish Galusa, and he did so according to his shita. That is, that he made it so that it was not touching. Omar le Rav Sheshes l'shamei de Rav Gado l'shamei Rav Gado. Rav Sheshes turned to his shamish Rav Gado. Zeal, he said, go sholif shedinhu. He says, pull down and throw down the tzuras ha-Pesach. Also, because Rav Sheshes held that it was invalid and people will then be metaltel there improperly. It'll be osir. Ozol sholaf shadinhu. So his shamish Rav Gado went and he indeed threw it down. Ashkechu de Reish Galusa chavshuhu. The house of Reish Galusa, the household saw what he had done, and they put him in prison. Ozal Rav Sheshes kam abova. Rav Sheshes got up and he stood by the entranceway of the prison, basically saying that he is the one who instructed his shamish to do so. Omar le, he said to him, Gada, puk ta, go out and come. Nofak va'osa, he went out and he came. In other words, they allowed him out because they realized that he was going based on the instructions that Rav Sheshes had given him. The Gemara now tells over Ashkechi Rav Sheshes l'Rabba bar Shmuel. Rav Sheshes came across the sage Rabba bar Shmuel Amar Lei Tani Mar Midi B'tzuras HaPesach. He turns to Rabba bar Shmuel and he asks him, did he learn a halacha, a teaching in regards to Tzuras HaPesach? Amar Le'in. He said yes. Tanina Kippah. It was taught in a brisa in regards to an archway. Here with regards to then the halachas of Hilchas Mezuzah. Rabbi Meir mechayiv b'mezuzah v'chachamim poitrim. Rabbi Meir says an archer would be, would be chayiv in mezuzah, whereas the chacham say would be potter. V'shavin she'im yesh b'raglea asara she chayeves. They both agree that if the legs before it arches is only to be asar tfachim, then it's going to be chayiv in mezuzah. So here we see that even though there is no top, we have two of the vertical uprights, the mezuzos, and then it arches after 10 tfachim. Everybody agrees that for a valid mezuzah, even though we don't have the top, which is only above the arch, touching the vertical uprights. So you see over here clearly the halacha is like Rav Nachman. Just like in the case of mezuzah, the Gemara understands. It makes it so that it's a valid tzuras HaPesach. So too in regards to tzuras HaPesach, in regards to Hilchos Shabbos, it will also be valid even though it's not touching. The Gemara now tells us, Agav, the machloikis between Rabbi Meir and the Chacham in regards to an arch. Omar Abaye, Hakol Moedim, everybody agrees, Im Gevoya Asara, Ve'im Bragleh Shloisha. We know that when it comes to the doorway, it has to be the dimensions of 4 tfachim wide and 10 tfachim high to be at least a minimum of a door. So it says over here, in regards to their machlokes, Abai explains again, Hakol moedim im gevoya asara ve'en baraglea shlosha. Everybody agrees that if the height of the arch is 10 tfachim, but the legs are not even 3 tfachim, that means the legs before it even starts arching, before it gets to even 3 tfachim, it starts to arch, whereby you don't have arba tfachim wide because it's considered to be part of the ground, lavud. Inami yesh b'ragleh shloisha ve'en gevoya asara, or even if you will say it does have legs that are 3 tfachim high, but it doesn't have the height of asara tfachim, v'lo klum. Then therefore, in both cases, it's nothing. You don't require a mezuzah, not according to Reb Meir, and certainly not according to the Chachamim, because you're missing in the dimensions of asar tfachim high and 4 tfachim wide. Ki pligi be'shamai Ki pligi beyesh b'raglei gimel v'gavoya asara. When are they arguing? When the height of the legs are at least 3 tfachim, and the arch is 10 tfachim. Ve'ein rachava. Vein rachba arba, and the width is not arba tfachim the entire way before it arches. V'yesh ba lachuk lahashlima la'arba. But you could go ahead, and even though the arch itself does not have 4 tfachim wide, but nonetheless you can be choykek around the wall around it to make a full arba tfachim. According to Rabbi Meir, that would be sufficient. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Meir savar choykekin lahashlim, that would be sufficient to then carve out, to be mashlim the arba tfachim, and thereby you'll be chayiv mezuzah. V'rabbanan savre ein choykekin lahashlim, that we don't say choykekin that you carve out a area that is around the arch in order to make or potentially make the arba tfachim, and therefore would not be chayiv in mezuzah. Omarle, now the Gemara goes back to the encounter that Rav Sheshes had with Rabba, that Rav Sheshes said to Rabba, he said to him, if you learned a halacha in regards to Tzuras HaPesach, to which he shared with him this halacha of mezuzah. So once he heard this halacha mezuzah, indeed, as we said before, it doesn't have to touch the uprights. So therefore, when it comes to Tzuras HaPesach, just like in the case of mezuzah, in Tzuras HaPesach in regards to Hilchos Shabbos, it will also be valid without touching. So he turns back, Rav Sheshes turns back to him, and he says to him, to Rabbi Bar Shmuel, Mishkachas lohu, if you will find the Reish Galusa, the family, the household of Reish Galusa, lo tema lohu lebei Reish Galusa v'lo midi, don't say anything to them about this. Mehod de basnisa de kippah, in regards to this teaching of an archway. The Gemara now brings the next Mishnah, Hechsher Mavui, in regards to a Mavui, what is necessary to then be machsher a Mavui and allow a tiltul in the Mavui, assuming again there's a shitufe Mavois. Says that Mishnah Beishamai Omrim Lechi Vikara. It requires both a side post, a Lechi, and a Kara, a crossbeam. Beis Hillel Omrim Oy Lechi Oy Kara. It's sufficient to have one or the other. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Lechayayin. Rabbi Eliezer says in the Shita of Beis Shammai, unlike the Tanakam who says it's going to be one lechi, he says lechayayin. It has to be two lechi, one on each side. Mishum Rabbi Yishmael Omar Talmid Echad Lifnei Rabbi Akiva. In the name of Rabbi Yishmael, a Talmid said before Rabbi Akiva. This Talmid was a Talmid of both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael. It's identified as Rabbi Meir, and this Talmid said the following in front of Rabbi Akiva: Lo nechiklu beisham beis Hillel al mavui shehu pachos me'arba amos shu niter oil belechi or bekara. If there is a width that is less than arba amos, then he says, Rabbi Meir, that everybody, including Beis Shammai, would agree it's sufficient to have either a lechi or a kar. You do not need both. Al manechleku, what are they arguing? Al rachav me'arba amos ve'ad eser. When you have a width that is beyond Dalet Amos, up until Eser Amos, then there's a machlokes. Shebeis Shammai omrim lechi v'kare, ubeis Hillel omrim oy lechi oy kare. Rabbi Akiva al zeh ve'al zeh nechleku. No, they're arguing even when it's less than Dalet Amos width, even Beis Shammai will say in such a situation you would require both a lechi and a kare.